Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some flying kite cards using the new Simon Hurley Sky's the Limit collection from Spellbinders. There's this beautiful kite die set, and I love the different shapes of the kites on there. We also have a press plate set called Soaring Sentiments, perfect for sentiments for the cards with the kites, and you can use it for other things as well. Then there's a nice large layering stencil set for a background of kites, as well as a coordinating embossing folder. So you could use that stencil on its own, or you could use it with the embossing folder, or you could use the embossing folder all on its own. I'm going to use the DIY color deck from Spellbinders for my color combinations, and this is the card that I chose here. I also have a 1-inch square punch, perfect for the little squares on the side of the card. So this square on the side of the card fits 5 different colors, so you can pick and choose whatever colors you want from the color card in there. And the opposite side of the color card, there's different things on different ones. Some of them have different creative inspiration pieces, some of them have like color theory information, that sort of thing. Some of them have just different ways to spark your creativity, and I love the fact that the backs have different things on them, and it just gives you a few little ways to get creative. Now I'm choosing 5 different colors here, but you don't have to stick with that. You can get even more creative with your colors. So I am pairing my DIY color deck or DIY deck with my color swatch wheel dies. And what I'm doing for a lot of the different cards that I'm using is creating several different color combinations. So for my DIY deck, I'm just going to put 5 colors on there, but I have changed it up a tiny little bit and added different colors and swapped some out for my color wheel swatch, and I just keep them on a 1.5-inch ring. These are from Spellbinders, and these are perfect for going through, thrumming through, and coming up with different color combinations. Or if you're like me and sometimes get cut in a color rut, it's a great way to kind of get out of that and use a few different colors. And sometimes even just swapping out a few different colors from a color combination that you really like is enough to freshen it up for you. So I'm using some liquid glue to glue this on the side of my DIY deck. Then I'm going to put my acrylic block on there, just let it dry for a moment, and then when I'm done with them, I put them back in the box that the deck comes in. I will store it right in there. But I love the fact that these are just creative ways, and you're not kind of stuck with a certain color combination. There's enough colors in each one of those cards to really get creative and come up with several different combinations. Good way to get your creativity sparked. So for my first card, I'm using the layering stencil. I have a piece of 4.25 by 5.5-inch hammermill cardstock here, and I'm going to do my stenciling with a combination of distress inks as well as interference inks. I thought these kites would look gorgeous with some interference inks with that beautiful shimmer to them. Because my stencil is way larger than my piece of cardstock, and I didn't really want to come up with, or I didn't want to stencil a larger piece of cardstock and then cut it down, I'm just using some painter's tape on my sticky mat just to outline where the edges of the stencil are going to go. So then when it comes time to layer in the other layers, it's very easy to know exactly where it is. I don't have to spend any time making sure to line things up because I already have those tape pieces there, and they will do that for me. So because I'm doing the color or the interference inks, I always love using my black soot distress pad with that so that I can see both properties of the interference inks. I'm also bringing in my hickory smoke distress ink. So one of the pattern layers for my kite I will do with that black soot, which was that first layer that I did. The second layer just has some of the details as well as the strings, and I'm doing that with hickory smoke. So for this particular layer here, the strings aren't going to have any interference ink on them. They're just going to be that gray. The little details, which are the little cross areas, I don't even know what they're called when it comes to kites, those are going to have that hickory smoke on there, but that it will be covered with those interference inks. When it came time to choosing my interference for this card, I chose it based on the ink colors that would show up on the light cardstock or the white cardstock, and I compared it with the color choices that I chose for that DIY deck. So I tried to choose ones that were as close to those as possible. So I'm using Summer Garden, I'm using Sweet Treat. This one here is It is yellow, but when you tilt it in light, it'll have a little bit of a corally pink color to it on those dark areas. And then the last color I'm choosing is pink champagne, and I thought it was closest to that mulberry cardstock that I had on my DIY deck. So the cardstock colors that I'm using for this video for any of the colored cardstock is Poppy, which is the red. Mulberry is the darker purpley pink color. Beeswax is the yellow. And then I have Rainforest, which will be the green. Cosmic Sky for the blue. And then I'm just using white cardstock for my card bases, as well as black cardstock for some of the details and strings. So you can see how quick and easy it is to do these layers. Now, if I were planning on doing a couple cards with this stencil background, I would have chosen a piece of cardstock that was 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches and do the entire thing and then cut it in half and do it that way. Because I only wanted to create one card with this stencil background, this is the way that worked best for me. And these pieces of painter's tape, I will keep them because they're not getting ink or paint on them or whatever. I'll just keep them aside, and next time I'm doing a project where I need some painter's tape, I'll just reuse those pieces. So I do use my tape several times just to get good use out of it so it doesn't go to waste. With my background done here, I can set it to the side to dry for just a few moments while I create my sentiments for my card. So for the sentiments, I'm using the Better Press system with that Soaring Sentiments Better Press plate. I have another piece of Hammer Mill cardstock here that I'm taping to the clear plate. And then I'm going to put the sentiments plate onto the base of my Better Press. I'm just going to use some Better Press ink. This is just black ink. I could use the black soot distress ink that I was using for some of the details for my stenciling. I opted to do the Better Press ink only because it's permanent ink. It's a smaller pad, just a little bit easier to handle sometimes with the Better Press plates. Put the clear plate onto the base of my Better Press system and then run it through the Platinum 6 machine to press those details in there. And this plate here obviously has all of the sentiments on it. And then there's a coordinating die to cut out those sentiments. And I always love when we have single plates with multiple sentiments as well as single dies that cut out those sentiments. It's a real time saver to be able to create, I think this is 8 sentiments all at one time. So I'll have more than enough for what I need for my cards today, and I will just save the rest of the sentiments for future projects. Now, when I save my future sentiments, I will just put them in a little Ziploc bag and keep them in that same packaging where that die and Better Press plate is, because when I'm going through my products and I know what sentiments I'm using, say if I know I'm going to use a sentiment from here, having those sentiments right there, I can just thumb through them, see if one of them is the one that I want for the project that I'm doing. I don't store them anywhere else because there would be a lot of sentiments to go through, shall we say that. So with my background done here, I'm going to trim that down, and I'm trimming it down to 4 inches by 5.25 inches. I have a black piece of cardstock that I'm going to use as my mat around my image, and I'm trimming that to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. So I'm going to put that onto my white card base. So I'm going to have really, really thin mats here, but I wanted to show as much of that kite background as possible. And I love how adding it or lining it up in that embossing folder and then embossing it just gives those kites some extra detail. So you can see how quick and easy it was to come up with a card that has a lot of nice bright colors with it. And of course, with kites, you can do anything with the colors. There's nothing more fun, I think, than a sky with a whole bunch of brightly colored kites in it. I kept my background just white cardstock, but you could easily swap it for some light blue, and I think that would be even better with this. I chose not to add any light blue here, mainly because I didn't want to add more colors. There's a lot of colors here, but you could easily do that. The kites themselves are very easy to put together. There's several different layers, or there's a couple layers that go on to different ones. So for this particular one, there's some triangles that go on, obviously, to create those colors. And then there's also little bow dies that you can use to create some little bow tails for your kites. There's different strings for the kites that go different ways. Some are longer, some are shorter, so you can pick and choose exactly what's going to work best for the look that you're going for. And anytime I'm gluing die cuts together, I like to use a liquid glue. Here I'm using Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. I love liquid glue because it gives you that wiggle room to move and shimmy things in place. And then it dries fairly quickly and it goes a long way. So for this background, I'm not going to stencil the background, but I am going to emboss it. So when I put my cardstock here, and this is just another piece of hammermill cardstock, I made sure that the area where I wanted my kite to sit didn't have any embossing on the back of it. I kind of chose a blank area there so that I'm going to have the impression of the kites on my background. They're not going to be colored, so they're not going to distract from the brightly colored die cut, but I am putting that kite in an open area. So once again, my mat here, I trimmed down to 5 3/8 inches by 4 1/8 inches. My white piece here, I trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. For this card, I wanted to pair it with the Tunnel Clouds die. This is from a collection that came out almost a year ago, I think. And I just thought it would be fun to have kind of one of the tunnel clouds in here so that you saw the embossed detail on the back of it or in the center of it, but then it just had the blue kind of frame to it for a sky background. So I picked the middle size for that Tunnel Clouds die set. I'm putting it onto my cardstock here, and this cardstock I trimmed down to 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. So it's just a little bit smaller than that white piece. So when I go put it on my card, we're going to see that black mat, we're going to see the white mat with just a touch of the embossing, and then the blue piece. You could easily do this piece a little bit larger if you wanted to, but I kind of thought it would be nice to see that white frame outside of the blue, simply because the blue is so dark, and I thought that against the black you wouldn't really be able to tell much difference. So again, just for something a little bit different, just a little bit of a different look. So I'm going to glue that onto the card front there, then I can glue that kite. And because I have all the layers of that kite ready to go, it's really easy to just place it exactly where I want it and then let it dry for a moment. I can pick and choose whichever sentiment I want. And I'm creating 3 cards in this video. That plate and the die set created 8 cards, so I'll have lots to choose from as I'm creating. Once I've let that kite dry for just a few moments, I can trim off the excess of the tail. I always like to do that afterwards just to make sure I don't accidentally trim it a little bit too short. Now, even though we have the texture from that background, I thought adding just a tiny little bit of stickles and then just some little dots with the stickles on the kite would add a little bit more texture as well as a bit of sparkle. It just gives it a little bit, just takes it to the next level, shall we say. So for my last card, I'm just going to use the different kite die cuts. Now I've got a bunch of them die cut here, and like I said before, they're very easy to put together. It's really easy to know which pieces go where. And once again, I'm using that liquid glue to glue it all in place. That way I can move and shimmy things exactly where I want them to. And just like my last card, I'm going to assemble the kites fully, let that glue set and dry, and then I'm going to put them all on the card at one time. That way I can place them on that card with the strings, knowing exactly where everything is pointing and going to. You could, if you wanted to, assemble them on the card. I kind of just prefer doing it this way. That way, if how I think I want it in my head doesn't really look right when I start placing things down, it's really easy to move it and know exactly how things are going to look, simply because that the kites are completely assembled, ready to go. I see all the colors that are on them, and I have that full image. So it's one of those things that's kind of personal preference. Some people may prefer to assemble it on top of the card. This is just the way that I like to do it, and it works out. This glue, even though it's liquid glue, it doesn't take very long to dry. So you're not sitting there waiting a long time for things to dry. It dries fairly quickly. So typically by the time I'm done my third kite here, and when I go and layer my pieces onto my card, my kites are going to be ready to go, all dried, and I can assemble it. So I'm not really waiting for anything to totally dry. So for these kites here, I chose different colors for each one of them so that we would have a lot of color on the front of the card. They also have options for little ribbons and little ties on them. I think those little details just take it to the next level and are a great way to add a lot of interest to the fronts of the cards. With my pieces here assembled, I thought it would be interesting to bring back that layering stencil and add some of those layers on top of the finished die cut kites, just with some interference inking. So I'm going to push them or put them on top of the different kite shapes, and then I'm going to pick and choose which interference ink goes best with the colors that are below. Now, just like I said before, the interference inks have a different look on light or dark cardstock. With these colors, they're going to have just a tiny little bit of a different look as well. So we're not going to be seeing like bold color here, but what it's doing is just adding a touch of color with that shimmer. So most of it, for the most part, what we're going to see is just that shimmer when we tilt it into the light. I think the one that shows the most of the color is this one here that I'm working on, because I'm going to work with the Summer Garden. I'm going to use the Summer Garden pad. You're going to see the detail on that yellow because that green is darker than the yellow. For the other ones, you can see the detail on there, but it's fairly subtle until you tilt it in the light and you see that shimmer. So it's a really nice way to add that detail, and by having stencils, you don't have to come up with that detail on your own. So for this background, I'm also going to use that embossing folder, and once again, I'm not going to stencil it. I didn't want to have my card front be too busy and take away from the attention from my die cuts. So I thought just a subtle background with that embossing was an interesting way to tie the two together, but again, not take away the attention from those die cut kites. Just like the rest of my cards, I'm doing a black mat behind here, and it is trimmed to 5 3/8 inches by 4 1/8 inch. My white embossed piece here is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And I like trimming my embossed pieces after they're embossed. Sometimes if I trim them ahead of time and then emboss them, sometimes it distorts the measurements just a little bit. So I've kind of changed and started just trimming things down afterwards so that I know that I don't have any measurements or any pieces distorted. I have it as close as possible. So before I glue things down permanently, I'm just laying them down, making sure that the design that I have in my head, I like it when it's on the card. So once I have confirmed that, I can glue those in place. And because those kites are already together, you can see how quick and easy it is for the front of my card to come together. The thing that took the longest for all of these cards was die cutting. Well, the ones that have die cuts on them anyways. So once it came time to assemble them and assemble the card, that comes together really quickly. And just like the last card, I left the strings on the end of my die cuts, glued them in place, let that glue sit for a moment, and then I'm just taking my detail scissors just to trim that down a little bit. And I trimmed it so that when I trimmed it, it's even with the black mat, so I don't see anything outside of that. So there is the finished card with the embossed background but not inked, the die cuts that have the interference detail on them. And then we have our second card that has the detail on the back with or embossed on the back with the Tunnel Clouds die that kind of focuses the attention on that kite. And then our first one with those gorgeous interference inks that just have some stunning shimmer to them. And I love the simplicity of just those inks and the embossed background. This is a fantastic collection to play with, and you can really get creative with all the colors that you use. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. Have a fantastic day.